name is Sarah, and this is Lawyer Talk Thursday. And this Thursday, I'm here in San Antonio with DWI lawyer Trey Porter. So introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, my name is Trey Porter. I've got a DWI in criminal defense practice here in San Antonio. We're filming in my office, not too far from the courthouse here in the Fine Silver building.
So, what I want to do today is dispel some of the common myths you have about DWIs and let you know what to do if you ever get pulled over for driving while intoxicated. So Trey, let's start with when someone sees those flashing lights in their rear view, what do you do?
The first thing you do is you take a deep breath. You're about to have the interview of your life. You're going to be recorded on video, it's going to be on audio. So of course you're going to be nervous, but just take a moment to kind of be calm and collect yourself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now you're pulled over, right? You gotta stop safely.
Right.
And then they come up to your window. What's next?
So just as a precursor to that, when you're stopping, a lot of people freak out when they see those lights. Don't just pull off really quick. Make sure you stop in a safe, like Alex said, and in a really kind of deliberate way. If there's a parking space, don't park across the lines, pull into the parking space. But once the officer comes up, you have to engage. Typically the officer will ask for your driver's license and or insurance or registration. You do have to provide those things, but beyond that, you really don't have to do a whole lot else other than get out of the vehicle if asked.
Yeah, absolutely. So Trey's going to tell us exactly what his advice is to say, but you know, we're taught as kids, we grow up, right, to be cooperative with police, to give them the information that they want, but you often forget that you don't have to provide that information because you have a constitutional right not to answer questions.
Absolutely, and it feels weird, right? Because like Alex said, we all want to be cooperative and we do respect law enforcement, but the reality is that officers are protecting our rights, and one of our rights is to remain silent. So while you do have to provide that very bare bones identifying information, beyond that you don't have to answer questions about where you're coming from or where you're going or what you're doing or if you've had something to eat or if you've had something to drink. You don't have to answer any of those, and it's going to feel weird, but the thing to do is just politely say, officer, I want to be cooperative, but with all due respect, I'm not going to answer any questions tonight.
And heaven forbid, don't say you drank 2 beers, okay? Everybody says, I drank 2 beers.
There's no reason to say how much you have had to drink or not have had to drink.
Or if you have had any at all.
Correct. This is you're being stopped presumably for a traffic violation. And so there's a certain period of time that the law says that the officer can detain you. Now, if you start to open the door into things you've had to drink that day or other things that you've done that day, that can be extended and then potentially lead to a DWI arrest.
Absolutely. So if the officer comes up to your window and says, sir, have you been drinking? Your response is?
Officer, I want to be cooperative, but I just want to let you know I'm not going to answer any questions tonight.
Okay. And you get out of the car?
You get out of the car if asked. A lot of people feel like they can stay in their car. Unfortunately, you can't. You do have to get out of the car, and that's typically when the officer will say, well, I need to do some tests just to make sure that you're okay. You don't want to do those tests, and you have a constitutional right not to do those tests.
So when the officer asks you, sir, are you willing to perform these tests? Your answer is?
Officer, again, I want to be cooperative and respectful, but I'm not going to do any tests and I'm not going to answer any questions.
Absolutely. So when you're doing those tests, you may think, man, I can balance on one leg, or I can walk a line, or my eyes are fine. But we've got someone who's SFST certified right here, and your response to that is what?
Don't do it. We could have an Olympic athlete on the side of the road. They would very likely not pass these tests. It's not worth doing it, and the only thing that you're providing is additional evidence in what could be a prosecution for DWI or some other offense.
Yeah, absolutely. You're just giving them more evidence to charge you and maybe eventually convict you of DWI.
That's correct.
Yeah, absolutely. So next comes, sir, will you consent to a breath test? What do you say to that?
I say that you're going to just repeat the same thing. Officer, I want to be cooperative and respectful, but I'm going to decline that test or any other test.
Okay, and then what happens next once you decline?
Typically, you're going to be subjected to a blood draw. I know that you had said that that's what happens in El Paso. It certainly happens here in Bexar County and other counties. But what happens by refusing to consent to a breath test is you put the officer in a situation to create a warrant to search your body in order to get the blood and test it. That warrant has to be supported by probable cause. So the officer has to have some reasons. He or she can't just do it because they want to, right? And if you haven't answered questions and if you haven't performed field sobriety tests, then whatever you were pulled over for is very likely not going to be enough to stand up to scrutiny if later in court, Alex or myself or some other criminal defense attorney is challenging that probable cause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So they're going to write something in the affidavit like slurred speech, bloodshot eyes, all this stuff, smell or odor of alcohol on your breath or person, even through a mask. I kid you not, they can smell it, they say. But you're not going to have performed SFSTs, you're not going to have admitted to drinking if you have been drinking, so those things won't be in the affidavit supporting probable cause.
That's correct, and because they're not in the affidavit, then they can't be used in order to get into your body and draw the blood and then test the blood. So even if they do it, potentially down the road in your case, it could be suppressed, which means they have that result, right? But the judge will find that the way they got it wasn't good enough, which makes your case even stronger.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So at this point, they pretty much decided already to arrest you.
Correct.
Yes. So
Correct.
You're getting arrested. What is your thoughts about someone talking themselves out of a DWI?
It's just not going to happen. I know we all have that desire to, we want to engage, we want to tell our side of the story, we want to bring up factors that we might think are important, right? All of that is good and well once you have an attorney, right? But you're not doing anything except creating more evidence and potentially creating more problems if you're trying to talk it out with the officer. It's just not going to work.
Mm-hmm. And I've especially seen it as a problem if there's a language barrier, right? And so you're speaking in Spanish and maybe that officer doesn't translate it correctly and things end up in a complaint affidavit that you didn't even say at all.
Correct. And also, all of us, it's totally natural to be nervous when we're on the side of the road and we're talking to an officer. So whether you've had 0 beers, 10 beers, or 20 beers, right, you're going to be a little nervous when you're talking, and you might say something that you didn't mean to say, right? You might know that you're going north, but say that you're going south, right? The officer is trained to use that as something against you in support of a potential arrest and prosecution.
Mm-hmm. Like, for example, let's say you were coming from your cousin's house and then you stopped at this bar and then you went to someone else's house and then you went home, right? They're gonna ask you where you're coming from and you say I was coming from my cousin's house, and then when they ask it again, right, trying to trap you, you're like, oh, I was coming from the bar or something like that, and then all of that looks inconsistent when in reality you did all of those things, you just didn't show the chain of events at the beginning, so they trip you up all the time.
And it's natural, right,
Mm-hmm.
to do it just like
Absolutely.
that. The problem is though is that it's going to be held against you. It's going to be held against you in this situation, whereas in another situation it wouldn't be.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you're being arrested. What is the next step? What's your advice other than keep your damn mouth shut?
Keep your mouth shut. You can, a lot of times people say, you can beat the rap, but you can't beat the ride. That is true, right? There is a very high burden, the highest burden of proof in our whole country to convict somebody of DWI. On the flip side, the burden to arrest someone for DWI is quite low, right? So it's important to, and I know it's difficult in a tenuous situation like this, but it's important to realize that just because you're being arrested doesn't mean that all hope is lost, doesn't mean that you can't fight back, doesn't mean that you're not eventually going to get out of it. But what you do in that time, which we're recommending is nothing, keep your mouth shut, that's going to help you get to that ultimate goal that you want, which is to get this thing off your record and behind you.
Absolutely. And a word to the wise is do not speak to anyone. You may think it's safe once the cop has given you over to detention officers, for example, or booking officers, or if you're in front of a magistrate judge or anything like that. But anything you say to any of those officers, if it is documented, can be used against you. If you say something in open court to the magistrate who's reading you your rights, that can be used against you. So it's best to just keep your mouth shut.
Keep your mouth shut, and also remember, at least while you're in detention, you're very likely being recorded, at least on video, and in some situations on audio as well. All of those things are discoverable, and all of those things can be used against you. So if you follow this advice and you keep your mouth shut and you make it all the way down to the station, don't blow it once you're in the station by then engaging in a conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so then now you're in jail and you gotta get out. So you bond yourself out of jail.
Right.
And what's the process like after that?
So the very first thing that you need to be concerned with when you're facing a DWI charge, right, is who are you going to get to stand up for you, who's going to assert your rights and protect your rights. So it's important to really start searching for a criminal defense attorney that has experience with DWIs.
And the answer is not yourself, you need a lawyer.
Not yourself, and also it's not a deal that you want to take lightly and have your cousin's brother's friend's neighbor who's a tax attorney help you out with this. No offense to all the tax attorneys out there. But the reality is you need a specialist. If you're having heart surgery, you get a heart surgeon. If you're having brain surgery, you get a brain surgeon. If you're dealing with a DWI, you need somebody who has experience with DWIs. So I would say that's number one. But number two is protecting your driver's license. Protecting your driver's license. Everybody who refuses to provide a specimen of their breath or blood that's charged with DWI, you're going to receive an automatic driver's license suspension, but you can contest it. You only have 15 days from the date of arrest in order to make that assertion with the administrative office in Austin. And any attorney that you get that has experience will totally quarterback that situation for you to try to prevent the suspension of your driver's license.
Absolutely. So that's why it's important to hire your lawyer pretty much immediately. I have a lot of clients that come to me, 30 days post DWI,
Right.
or when they get that first court notice for arraignment or something like that, and that period has already passed.
Exactly, and once you pass those 15 days, you may be eligible for an occupational license, which can keep you street legal, but you can't go back in time. So those first 15 days are critical. One thing I don't know if we mentioned, it's free to make this request. So there's no reason at all to do it or to delay in doing it. And if you're somebody who wants to shop around a little bit for an attorney, you can make the request yourself for free online on the DPS website. That preserves the hearing, and then once you hire somebody, they can sub in and kind of take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's say you go to the LR hearing, your license gets suspended anyway, you get your occupational, what's the next step?
So the next step is, once you get your occupational, that means you're street legal, right? Depending on your history and depending on what DPS has done, you will know the date that your license is going to be eligible again to get back for normal. But now you're shifting to the focus of defending against the DWI charge. So you've dealt with the state office on the license. Now you're dealing with the local prosecutorial office, whether that's here in Bexar County, that would be the Bexar County District Attorney's Office. In El Paso, it would be the local authority there.
Yep, El Paso County DA's office. So that's who your attorney is going to go back and forth with, negotiating or just saying, hey, there's not enough evidence here, this is a trial case, not going to be able to make it.
Right, and it's important to, again, going back to having the right person to stand up for you, because it's important to be very thorough, right? DWI cases, a lot of people think that they aren't complex because they happen in a short period of time, right? But they are complex. There are a number of different moving parts. Who's the officer that made the arrest decision? Has that officer ever had an issue professionally with making decisions before? Has that officer ever had issues personally, in their personal life, making decisions before? Could that somehow affect the decision that he or she made in making your arrest, right? What does the audio and video look like? Let's say that the evidence against you for the state's perspective is strong, right? But the stop was bad. The officer said that you ran a stop sign, and the video clearly shows that you stopped, took a deep breath, and then proceeded, that you didn't run the stop sign. That means that the stop is suppressible, and everything else is what we call the fruit of a poisonous tree, which means it's out. So it's important to be thorough, get all of those things, and review them. There's no reason to ever rush in a DWI case.
Yeah, so what do you think, about 4 to 6 months, up to a year usually getting through the system?
I think it's pretty safe to say 4 to 6 months. Of course, right now with COVID, right? I mean, everything is delayed, and so I think it's probably right to expect some delay in that timeline because of just what we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, and then depending on whether it's a breath test or blood test, I mean, we've got science issues to take a look at. We've got things from DPS labs that we can request to take a look at. So, like Trey said, it's important to have somebody that's knowledgeable and familiar with that type of evidence.
Absolutely, and then it's also important to have somebody that's knowledgeable, not just for the evidence, but to put forth your rights. So we want to be able to protect your rights, but you also have a right to what's called a speedy trial, right? So it's important to assert those rights so that while we're doing our due diligence, if the state creates delay, as they often do, then you can really call that to the judge's attention, and in some situations have the case dismissed with prejudice, not because of the facts, but because of the delay and the dilatory actions that the state has taken.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so what else should my followers know about DWI?
A couple things about DWI that I think are important. Most of my clients, Alex, I don't know about yours, but most of my clients that are facing a DWI first, that's the first time they've ever been in trouble before, right? So it's important to take it very seriously, because although DWI as a first offense is still a misdemeanor, you can go to jail for up to 1 year, depending on what the facts of the case are.
Right.
And even if you do navigate through the process in a way where you avoid jail time, DWI can have far-ranging consequences. If you have a DWI conviction on your record, you can never go to Canada, right? So small little things like that can pop up down the road. It can pop up on a background check, a security clearance for a job that you've had for 10 years, but now you're getting a promotion. They run that background check, the DWI now comes up, and unfortunately you can't get it. So it's just critical to take it as seriously as you can and to be as thorough as you can with it, because otherwise it can come back to haunt you.
Absolutely. I second that for sure. Well, Trey, thanks for being with me today.
Absolutely.
I'm sure my followers will love all this advice. If they get a DWI or other criminal offense in San Antonio area or other areas that you work in, how do they contact you?
The best way to contact me is just to find me on the web, TreyPorterLaw.com, or if you Google DWI lawyer in San Antonio, you're going to find me immediately. We're available 24/7, and you can call or send a text. We can get something scheduled immediately. Like I said, time is of the essence, especially on the front end, so take that seriously.
Awesome. So if you have any other DWI questions, send them to me in my messages and we'll answer them for you.
Thanks, Alex.